Who's allowed to launch an attack on another country? Just asking questions. Representative Khanna of California is here with us today to talk about his war powers resolution that he's co sponsoring with Kentucky Republican Thomas Massie, who's also been a guest on this show many times before, which would require President Trump to seek congressional approval before continuing to drop bombs in Iran. Congressman Khanna, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. So here's the text of your resolution. It says that directing the president, pursuant to Section 5C of the War Powers Resolution, to remove United States armed forces from unauthorized hostilities in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And you list a few facts such as that Congress has the sole power to declare war. Congress has not declared war. Therefore, forces shall be removed by the president if Congress so directs. And the kind of summary statement here is Congress hereby directs the president to terminate the use of the United States armed forces from hostilities against the Islamic Republic of Iran unless explicitly authorized by a declaration of war or specific authorization for use of military force against Iran. So, given that Trump has already dropped bombs on Iranian nuclear sites without consulting Congress, what are you worried could still transpire at this point if Congress doesn't act to pass this or the similar bill in the Senate being offered by Tim Kaine?
There's a fight for Donald Trump's decision making here. And the fight is between the neocons, people like Lindsey Graham, who want regime change in Iran, people like Netanyahu, who want regime change in Iran, people like Brett McGurk, who have been itching for that kind of regime change, who chair-led for the war in Iraq. And on the other side, there is the MAGA base, who do not want another war in the Middle East, who do not want more of our money spent in missiles in Iran or troops in the Middle East. And we saw that Donald Trump was listening to both in every day. Now, I believe that it was our war powers resolution and the activism of the MAGA base and other voices that convinced him not to escalate after the strikes. But he could be persuaded again to go in or say, well, we didn't destroy enough of the nuclear facility or we didn't get all the nuclear fuel. And that's why it's important that he hear from the anti-war base of his own party and from the country.
It seems like this is a kind of an opportunity to give Trump some amount of credit, if I may be so bold, because in the past we've seen many Republican administrations that are much more firmly planted on the neocon side, whereas it's almost like Trump has devils on his shoulder and angels on his shoulder. Depending on your bona fides, you can decide which side is which. But there's a real push and pull, a real tension within him as to whether the sort of neocon wing or the very anti-war wing should win out. Are you heartened to see this tension present in a Republican president right now?
I appreciate that he didn't escalate and that we have a ceasefire. I agree with you that there is a tension within his base. I do think that many people in his base felt let down that he struck initially in Iran. That's not what they voted for. It's the first time I saw any real crack in his base. I mean, the tariffs upset some of the business leaders, but this really upset people who voted for him, who said, you're not prioritizing us. You're not prioritizing jobs here. You're engaged in the same kind of war games that other presidents have. But the place, though, that I would hope that he'd develop is that it's not enough to stay out of wars. You also have to engage in the tough diplomacy. And the reality is, I believe that we need to deny Iran a nuclear weapon. We shouldn't have gotten out, in my opinion, of the JCPOA. At the very least, we should have worked within it to strengthen it. We did get out. That led to enrichment. And now the question is, how are we going to prevent Iran from racing to the nuclear bomb? And I think that the president needs to engage in diplomacy. That previous Republican presidents, actually, like Bush Sr. And even Ronald Reagan, had more of a commitment to. We haven't seen that from the president.
I want to bring up a tweet from one of your colleagues here. This is Congressman Greg Stube from Florida, a Republican, because I think he lays out the case for why he thinks Trump should have taken this action and why it legally is allowed to take this action. It says he says that President Trump has full constitutional authority to take military action against Iran's nuclear program without a formal declaration of war. Article 2, Section 2 empowers the commander in chief to use the armed forces to defend national interests and respond to imminent threats. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 allows a 60-day window plus a 30-day withdrawal period as long as Congress is notified within 48 hours. Presumably, he's saying that Iran having a nuclear bomb itself posed an imminent threat to U.S. security, therefore justifying this unilateral action. What's your response to that?
Well, it just didn't. I mean, even his own national director of intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, said it was not imminent. I don't think that any ordinary American believes that Iran was on the cusp of launching missiles against American troops or against America. If anything, now Americans are more at threat than they were. Now, he hasn't violated the War Powers Resolution. He did give notice to Congress, and now we get to vote. But his initial acts were a violation of Article 1 of the Constitution, in my view, where there was no reason for him to be engaged in an overseas war without first coming to Congress for a declaration of war authorization of force. The War Powers Resolution is sort of a remedy. It's when the president engages in something that we think is unconstitutional. It says, okay, you now come to Congress and you have to get something resolved within 60 days. But that doesn't mean that he had the authority in the first place. And if you define the president's authority as so broadly as anything in the national interest, I mean, you could go to war anywhere. I mean, that would basically deny Congress any approval. Now, what administrations have done is they basically said, okay, if you have, the only time they really have to get approval from Congress if it's a dragged out, prolonged war. Frankly, Obama made that argument in Libya that was wrong. Biden made that argument in striking Houthi ships in the Red Sea. That was wrong. Trump's making that argument in Iran. But modern warfare is not, these year-long battles. And I don't think that the Constitution says, okay, if you have a quick military strike and no ground boots, and it's a quick war, then you don't need Congress. But if you have a long war, then you need Congress. But that's really how modern presidents have been operating. And Thomas Massey and I have called out presidents of both parties. I mean, this is not a partisan issue. I mean, what Trump did is very similar to what Obama did in Libya. And I have great admiration for President Obama. So this is about reclaiming the Constitution.
It seems like one of the real significant strengths of this strike using these bomb blasters in Fordo in Iran is the fact that it was done, seemingly with a lot of precision, but also very stealthily. Everybody was caught off guard by it to some degree. If Trump had sought congressional authorization, obviously that wouldn't have been the case. Do you still think that that is what he should have done?
Yes, I mean, Donald Trump is a lot of things. He's not exactly stealth. If he was on Truth Social saying he wants to assassinate Khamenei, he was saying that he's going to bomb them if they don't comply. So he could have gotten Congress's authorization at any time that he put the Truth Social post up. And he could have said, look, I have Congress who said I can do this at any time. Right now, I'm not choosing to do it. I'm doing it in 2 weeks. And then he could have attacked, and it would have had the same element of surprise. If anything, it would have strengthened his hand because he would have been seen as having congressional authorization. And, the irony is I think he would have gotten congressional authorization. I would have opposed it, but he would have gotten it. So why didn't he come to Congress? Because he would have really heard from the anti-war MAGA base, the Tucker Carlsons, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Thomas Masseys. And he didn't want to split the base. He didn't want that argument out there aired in front of the American people. And frankly, Congress didn't want to assert itself because Congress doesn't want to vote on these things. Congress, rather, the president take the blame. And this is why we've had a dysfunctional system since Iraq. Congress has basically punted on these issues.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I am curious though, something that you mentioned, I think a few times publicly, is that you do believe that it is a national security priority to stop Iran from having a nuclear bomb. but that, the way we're going about it, possibly starting another war in the Middle East, is not the appropriate solution. Tell me, what is the appropriate solution? Diplomacy, I think it's easy to sort of hand wave about, and I am sympathetic to that. But what's the actual, Trump was trying to hammer out a deal with Iran before this. It's not as if he hadn't attempted to exhaust the diplomacy options on the table. What was his actual recourse that would have been truly effective in stopping Iran from getting a nuclear bomb? We can dispute the timeline and how eminent it was as much as we want, but I would love just like a sense of what is the optimal approach that Trump should have taken?
Well, he was working on it. I supported him, and then Netanyahu bombed. I think Netanyahu wanted to force the hand, not to let the diplomatic process play out. Look, Obama with the JCPOA showed what was possible at the time of the Iranian regime was stronger than it is now. They had agreed to not have any enriched uranium beyond 3.67%. They had limited it to Natanz. The IEAE did inspections up to 2018. They didn't find a single violation. Now, the criticism of the JCPOA is that it didn't go after the ballistic missiles. And you could have come in and said, we're going to try to get further concessions on the ballistic missiles. Obama got a UN resolution, but he didn't get verification. But we could get a system of verification because we did at JCPOA when Iran was stronger. And Iran has a lot of interests that they care about: the sanctions relief, being able to have us be seen as part of the international community of nations. So I do believe that Trump, with a year-long diplomatic effort, could have achieved something. The irony is he's going to have to do the diplomacy now because Iran still has the nuclear fuel and they still have the capability to make the bomb. So unless we're just going to allow Iran to become a nuclear power, or unless we're going to plan to strike them every 6 months, he's going to have to engage in diplomacy.
So yeah, you're referring to the fact that they did not, wipe out all of their enriched uranium. There was even a report that was leaked yesterday or earlier this week that their ability to continue enriching the uranium might still be intact. So you're viewing this as something that is less than the complete success and obliteration that the administration is characterizing it as.
That's the evidence coming out from their own administration. J.D. Vance is saying they still have enough enriched uranium to possibly have 10 nuclear bombs. Their own defense intelligence agency is saying that maybe they set the Iranians back 3 to 4 months. Plus, you can't bomb know-how. I mean, ultimately, the Iranian people have the know-how. They have the scientists. So the question then is how do you get them to not build a bomb? And the reality is you have to have independent verification similar to the JCPOA, and you have to have a negotiation of what the sticks and carrots are.
I'm no war advocate here. Obviously, I work for Reason magazine, but on the topic of the know-how, I would note that part of this operation was, the taking out of what was it, like the top 7 most prominent nuclear scientists who had been working on these projects within Iran. What do you think of that? Do you think that that ultimately set back diplomatic efforts to such a degree that it was a foolish thing to do? Or do you think that those sort of, targeted assassinations probably are helpful in dismantling the nuclear program?
Well, I'm not for targeted assassinations, just in terms of what that means for a rules-based international order and the type of conflicts that it spurs. And, history, the gold said that the graveyard is filled with people who thought themselves indispensable. I don't think that just getting rid of the top 7 nuclear scientists in Iran is going to prevent the next generation from having the know-how. Maybe it slows them down, but it's not a decisive blow. And it's dangerous when you engage in this because that gives license to then Iran to say, okay, should they engage in assassination attempts against Americans or against Israelis? Should other countries be able to engage in those assassination attempts? This is why we have a rules-based order. Now, you could argue that there are exigent circumstances where that may be violated. If there was real intelligence and information seeing that American troops would have been struck or that our cities were at risk, then the commander-in-chief could make that determination, come to Congress, declare war. But I much rather be through a formal process than covert operations as well. I mean, we had the whole church commission because we were so overextended in these covert operations with our intelligence agencies on assassination that America reformed that. And it's much better for us just to be upfront when we are attacking a country that it is a war because they violated certain norms. And that doesn't take away the element of surprise, but it's transparent to the American people.
Trump called for a ceasefire earlier this week, which you have said you believe is in part because of this pressure that's been coming both from Congress and also from his own base. But he was very unhappy in the immediately after he called for that ceasefire when Israel and Iran continued to lob missiles at each other. I want to just roll that clip for a moment.
Israel says that Iran violated the peace agreement, the ceasefire agreement. Do you believe that Iran is still committed to peace?
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too.
Are you questioning if Israel is committed?
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
Do you have a response to Iran?
Obviously, a lot of frustration being expressed there. What do you make of what's going on here?
Putting aside his colorful language, I'm glad that he actually stood up and said, stop bombing to both Netanyahu and to Iran. And I support the ceasefire. And I'm hoping that he will tell Netanyahu to stop bombing in Gaza, too. I mean, there's huge humanitarian concerns there. The aid isn't getting in. Palestinians are, as they go to these aid sites, the Gaza Foundation, the humanitarian foundation, many are getting shot. And so Trump, good for him for saying to stop the bombing. And I hope he'll tell Netanyahu to stop the bombing in Gaza as well.
Do you think that, like, how much influence do you think Trump actually has over that situation? Because now we're just seeing this. There seems it was unclear how this even transpired from the get go, like whether Trump explicitly approved the initial strike on Iran or if Netanyahu kind of just went ahead and then Trump jumped on board afterwards. Like, do you have a sense of, I don't know, who's driving the ship at this point?
Well, we are the superpower. The question is just whether we choose to exercise our power. When he did, with that angry clip, you saw Netanyahu backed away right away and didn't engage in the escalation that was reported they were planning on. Literally an hour after he made that statement, there was a statement came out saying Netanyahu and Israel agrees to the ceasefire, isn't going to retaliate. He's authorized $14 billion of sales since he's been president to Israel. They are dependent on the United States. If he tells them to stop, they will stop, as we just saw. I mean, this was a clear example. And the question is not who calls the shots; it's whether Donald Trump wants to spend his political capital or make a decision to tell Netanyahu to stop. And I hope he will.
Yeah, it seems like you're advocating for Trump to use a little bit more of his influence with Netanyahu and to possibly take a little bit of a tougher approach with him. What specifically does that look like to you?
Well, it says that he needs to tell Netanyahu stop the bombing in Gaza. He needs to, at the same time, demand clearly the hostage release. I think he can get the hostages, and then he should convene a Middle East peace summit. I mean, he's so fixated on winning the Nobel Prize and bring the Saudis, bring Egypt, bring Jordan, bring UAE, bring people from Palestinian civil society and Israel, and to say, look, we're going to have a non-Hamas government in Palestine and Gaza. It's going to need the protection and troops from some of the surrounding Arab countries so that Hamas doesn't infiltrate again, and that government needs to recognize the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish democratic state, and Israel needs to recognize the new Palestinian state. I believe that is achievable, especially given that he does have decent relationships with some of the other Arab countries. But he has to be willing to first get the bombing to stop and the hostages released. I believe he can do that.
Do you think that's what Trump and I guess more importantly, not more importantly, but maybe as importantly, his closest advisors want? Do they want to work something out with the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, or is there, you know, is there a different sort of vision for the Middle East?
It's unclear. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes he talks about having Gaza developed into commercial property. Obviously, that's not recognizing Palestinian self-determination. But if he's serious about peace, he can get Netanyahu to stop. Now, it's a harder thing to get Netanyahu to stop in Gaza than to stop in Iran because Ben Gvir and Smotrich and part of Netanyahu's cabinet don't want him to stop and would threaten to leave the government. And that's why it's going to really take strong pressure from Donald Trump. But Trump has the leverage, and I guess the question is just how committed is he to ending that suffering?
I want to ask
The
you a little. Yeah, sorry, Liz.
the journalist Dave Weigel posted on Monday that House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries didn't even read your bill. I think we have a clip of that. If you could roll that, John.
Would you support the Khanna War Powers resolution?
I haven't taken a look at it.
Leader Jeffries.
Thanks.
Speaker Johnson.
I don't know. Like, do you find this a little insulting?
I have a good relation with Leader Jeffries. I think that was a clip taken, in a particular context. What he was talking about is there's another War Powers resolution that Adam Smith and Jim Himes and others are introducing. The language is very, very similar. We just had a meeting where many of us are getting behind both of them. So my guess is that what he was saying is that he wants to see which language he ultimately gets behind. But he's been very supportive of the War Powers resolution getting a vote and issued a statement to that effect.
But do you feel like there's urgency among Democrats to embrace this? I mean, you're trying to rein in executive power in a massive way, and you're partnering with Thomas Massie, a Republican, to do so. Do you feel like your own party supports this?
I believe the Democrats should be bolder in being the anti-war party. We lost that mantle to Donald Trump in 2016, and we lost it to Donald Trump in 2024. We should be the party that says this country has been in too much endless wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Iran, that we want to focus on bringing troops home to the extent that we can, that we want a less bloated defense budget, and that we want to invest in our communities, in jobs here, in childcare here, in lower grocery prices here, and that we want to stop these bad trade deals that ship too much industry overseas and globalization. Trump took that message from us, even though we have substantive policies. I think that really can make us the party of peace abroad and jobs at home. And that's the party that I'd like to build.
It seems as if Congress has abdicated its responsibility to weigh in on matters of war and peace, and that there might be incentives for that because then you're not on the record voting for and against. Like, how much of an appetite is there beyond you and Thomas Massie to actually reassert that power?
Well, we have 73 co-sponsors now on my resolution, even after the strikes have ended. And so obviously the urgency is a little less now than it was a few days ago, though there's a chance that Trump may take action again. So I believe that you can get over 100 members of Congress co-sponsoring this. That shows that there's a large group of people who believe Congress needs to reassert its role. And the reason they want Congress to reassert its role is not just procedural. It's that members of Congress are tied to their communities, and many people are hearing that that Americans want money focused in their communities, not on these overseas wars.
And could you talk a little bit more about your partnership with Massie in crafting this bill? Because he's now become kind of enemy number one. I'm going to say enemy number one. That would probably be Iran, but maybe enemy number two behind Iran for Trump, at least according to his social media feed, is Thomas Massie's like constantly going after him. What what is that partnership been like from your perspective?
Well, he's a principled person. We partnered together to stop Joe Biden from striking the Houthi ships without congressional authorization. We had spoken out against Yemen and the refueling of planes, of the Saudi planes, without any congressional authorization. We've spoken out against Libya and the unconstitutional strikes there. So the reality is that Thomas Massey is a person of principle who cares about the Constitution, and he's a profile in courage. I mean, he's going to have a huge super PAC spent against him. And the reason Trump did that is because Massey not just got under his skin, Trump was afraid that other members of Congress were going to follow suit and that he was going to lose more of his base. So he had to really establish deterrence that if you do this, you could be the next Thomas Massey. But I expect Massey will win. He's very popular in his district. I think he was one of the people who helped prevail to make sure this war didn't get extended.
I want to go back to something you were talking about just a minute ago. I've been thinking a lot about the sort of Tulsi Gabbard case study, I think you could call it, where somebody starts off as a Democrat and then they sort of shift into MAGA world. And I think with, Gabbard, there were a lot of reasons for that. But when you think about one thing that's been so consistent over the course of her career, I mean, it's her commitment to the anti-war cause. And the vision of the Democratic Party that you just articulated a minute or two ago, I love. I think it's lovely, but it isn't something that I necessarily super recognize in today's Democratic Party. And in fact, I feel like I can name more examples of the Tulsi Gabbard types, the people who are anti-war Democrats and then slowly sort of find, strange bedfellows in the MAGA movement and ultimately sort of drift and feel as though the Democratic Party doesn't actually support the causes that they care about when it comes to foreign policy. Are you articulating a vision of the Democratic Party that currently exists or that you hope exists in the future?
Well, it's existed in the past with Gene McCarthy and Bobby Kennedy and John F. Kennedy, even, I would argue, and a vision of peace abroad. I think it exists with Bernie Sanders, who really inspired many and exists in the Progressive Caucus. And I'm confident that that is going to prevail going forward. Now, there's a difference, I think, between the Democratic vision of peace abroad and some of the Republican vision, which is I do think the Democrats believe still in very robust engagement overseas in diplomacy and respecting the human rights of other countries in a Kennedy-esque vision that we provide moral leadership for seeing other countries become democratic without militarily intervening and us in hoping that they have economic development while prioritizing their own. And I think the MAGA movement veers more towards staying out completely of these international affairs, whereas the Democratic engagement, I think, does prioritize human rights and diplomacy. But on the intersection of staying out of wars, there is a common ground.
Hmm. It's funny that you should, invoke the Kennedy name. I obviously know what you mean. You're referring to a sort of different era, but I do wonder how much people now associate the Kennedy name entirely with RFK Jr.
Well, look, RFK has made a mark, but he's no John F. Kennedy. Come on. I think even he'd acknowledge that in his honest moments.
I mean, you do, to Liz's point, you do strike me as a different kind of Democrat, like out of step in some ways, in a good way with your party. Just I was listening in preparation for this. You were on Theo Vaughn's podcast earlier this week, which itself is like an unusual thing for a Democratic politician to do. And I thought it was great that you're and very smart that you're engaging with that audience because he is kind of like a direct line to the Trump circle. And you were making the case from a Democratic perspective for restraining the executive and the rule of law. But you seem to have a willingness to engage with quote unquote the other side more than some other Democrats. It's not just teaming up with Massey. You also teamed up with Matt Gaetz to try to push forward some legislation to stop Congress members from trading stocks and be a little more transparent about where their money is coming from and so forth. Um, you know, what is it? What kind of hope do you have for that kind of left right? I don't know, anti-establishment alliance going forward.
I think the American people want that. They're sick of the establishment in both parties. They're sick of the status quo. They think the status quo has failed them in terms of having too many of these foreign wars, in terms of seeing communities hollowed out, trade deals that didn't work out for places abandoned. You can't have a nation half prosperous, half with trillions of dollars like my district, and half abandoned and half in decline. And they're frustrated with the money in politics that they see, and the sense that special interests and lobbyists are rampant. And so they want reformers. They want people who are going to try to bring this country together, not with anodyne bipartisanship as a defense of the status quo, but with bring it together around a new agenda with reform. And that's why I pride myself on trying to build different kinds of alliances. With Todd Young, we passed the CHIPS Act together. I introduced with Representative Luna a bill to actually codify Donald Trump's executive order on big pharma and lowering prescription drug costs. We're amassing money times on issues of war powers. We worked with Don Bacon on issues of how do we integrate the advanced technology into our military. And I guess I just view it that you're here to do things for the American people, and neither party nor any citizen has a monopoly on the truth.
What are the big obstacles to that? Because even in that the kind of Gates team up that I mentioned before, there was an interesting exchange you guys had on Twitter about that, where you were asking him, he was asking you how many Democrats you could deliver for this agenda, which is term limits, bans on individual stock trading, things like that. And he says he caps out around somewhere around 8, and you say no more than 10. Um, what's going on here? It's something that I think a lot of Americans resonate with and would like to see. Just like these kind of anti-corruption measures, term limits. They're popular among Americans, but not popular in Congress. What are the big obstacles here?
Well, they hurt people who are currently in power. I mean, people don't want to give up power. People are used to raising money from PACs, from lobbyists. They're used to becoming lobbyists after they're members of Congress. And it's just led to a distrust in the system. You know, we were talking about John F. Kennedy. When John F. Kennedy was president, the approval in government was 60%, 60% trusted government. And that number is in the teens now. And it's sad. I mean, the government is critical to not just our national security, but in partnering to do big things and with the private sector to have new dreams. So if you care as a progressive Democrat, as I do, about being able to provide child care and health care, you need to have a government that people trust. I mean, one of the questions I saw that Joe Rogan asked Bernie Sanders, he said, you're for taxing the rich, but I believe government is corrupt. You've said government is corrupt with the big money in politics. So why should we be giving taxes to an institution that is corrupt? So you have to fundamentally answer this skepticism of government. It hurts people who believe government should have a role. But it's hard with the current entrenched generation. That's why I call for a new generation of leadership. That's why I'm not afraid to speak out and bash Chuck Schumer for a week on television because he was wrong. And I don't think that's personal. I don't have anything against him personally. But I think we have to speak out for our principles and close bolls and strikes regardless of party.
I hear what you're saying with regard to the idea that you need a certain amount of sort of mass trust in government in order to, have a healthy civil discourse and a government that can administer social services well, and all the other things, right? Legitimacy is good. Rule of law is good. I agree with you on all of that. But I do have to take issue with the notion that, having an American public that's, 60% approval rating, 60% trust in government is a good thing. I mean, shouldn't they have been a little bit more skeptical of their governments, especially as they were undergoing regime change all over Latin America and MK Ultra and all of these representatives were like low key endorsing like Jonestown? Like, I'm sorry, when I think back through American history, I think of a lot of cases of the government betraying or hoodwinking the American
Mm.
people, which is not to say that you should go full down a conspiratorial Joe Rogan-y rabbit hole, but it is to say that maybe that was too much trust in government. What do you make of that?
That's actually an excellent point. I mean, I think that there's probably a balance. I mean, we shouldn't be as trusting that we get only all our news from Walter Cronkite and take the president's word as a semi-religious figure, because that did get us into Vietnam. That did cause a lot of foreign policy that didn't respect human rights. That did lead to situations in our own country where civil liberties were being violated, or people weren't being treated fairly. But the opposite of that is just an inherent cynicism, an inherent skepticism, where I think actually the average American today probably believes, as dysfunctional things are, that members of Congress are more corrupt than they actually even are. I mean, there's just
Right.
this sense that they're all bad, they're all messed up, they're all bought, and that when you lose that kind of faith in government, that doesn't work either, because you need government to set a common purpose, to set a common direction, and absent an external threat like a war, that's become very hard, and we haven't been able to have solutions to immigration, to our challenges with technology, to our challenges with social media, to our challenges with jobs in places abandoned. So it's probably it's a balance.
You
Yeah, I
see a
mean,
little bit of this within, like, reflected within the American dynamism movement, which is sort of a foothold along the tech crowd and among the, many people on the right. But there's a little bit of the sense of like, we should be doing great things again. We should be building again. Our cities should, be, paragons of excellence, things we can take pride in. And yet we seem unmoored. We seem like we can't partake in these common projects together, whether they're private sector driven or public investment driven. So it's interesting what you're saying. I mean, even though you're a Democrat, I would say there's a huge contingent on the tech right that totally agrees with you and is very concerned about this issue. And like, we can't do big things collectively anymore because we've lost this sense of shared purpose. I don't know whether it should be directed by government per se, but we've had excellent private public partnerships in the past that have led to huge projects that have delivered technological advancement, and like now we just don't do that.
Yeah, it's this is why I call for a new economic patriotism, a 21st century Marshall Plan. I think our common purpose should be to bring 21st century economic renewal, economic jobs across this country in communities that have been left out. I think the economic divide in this country, where you have $5 trillion companies in my district and other places really hollowed out, where kids aren't going to live up to their parents' standard of living. I don't think that country can flourish with that kind of division. I mean, it's not quite what Lincoln's division was, half slave and half free, but half prosperous and half in decline is not a winning formula for the country. And in doing that, we can also make sure that everyone's on the playing field of Team America, so that we're leading in the industries of the future. So we're leading in new technology. But I think it is a Herculean task for anyone in politics to try to articulate a common mission that does that. It's one of those I got criticized yesterday, even though I've probably been the most visible voice in the Democratic Party against the war in Iran, and said that Trump's strikes are unconstitutional. I voted yesterday to table the impeachment, and people said, "Well, why aren't you impeaching him? If isn't that hypocritical?" And I said, if we were going to impeach presidents just based on doing any unconstitutional thing, there wouldn't be many presidents who wouldn't be impeached. But I did vote to impeach him twice before. It didn't work in terms of his conviction. And I do think that we have to be pragmatic and thoughtful about the deeper purpose in this country, which is, yes, accountability, but also how post Donald Trump, which is going to happen, do we start to figure out a new generation that can bring the country together? How are we going to achieve that with a common purpose? And it's a very, very difficult task.
I
I
mean,
think it's a good
given
idea
that,
that we should have no presidents. I mean, it's Reason Magazine. I think we kinda like that. No, just
but
kidding.
given the extreme distrust, especially of Congress of all the three branches, I think is worst of all in terms of public trust or confidence. Is there just a top one or two reforms that you think could start to turn that around and make this body more functional?
Money in politics and members of Congress becoming lobbyists. The PACs, the super PACs, the contributions that dictate what gets voted on is just terrible. We've got to get rid of PACs, super PACs. We've got to limit the influence of lobbyists in this country. I mean, there are 2 to 3 pharma lobbyists for every member of Congress. I was joking, I think, with Theo Bond. I said it's like having double coverage in a sporting event, or sometimes triple coverage. It was just insane. And then a lot of the members of Congress go become lobbyists, or staff members become lobbyists. That revolving door and the stench of money in politics needs to change, and that's probably the single biggest reform that we need.
Presidents have been going to war without permission for kind of a long time in this country. And Trump, in particular, I mean, even if your resolution passed, it's possible that Trump might not feel very constrained by it after all. Should we, in fact, just give up on the idea that Congress has any say in 21st century war making? And should we just focus on electing better presidents?
We certainly should elect better presidents, but we should give up on Congress, because when my war powers resolution with Sanders and Massey passed on Yemen, Donald Trump didn't sign in and never became law, but he voluntarily stopped the refueling of Saudi planes. And I think in this case, I don't give Congress the mass of the credit. I actually give a lot of commentators in the movement more credit than Congress. But the fact that Congress was also amplifying the base collectively it had an impact on Donald Trump. Public opinion had an impact on Donald Trump. So do I think that Congress winning back formal power with the War Powers Resolution is a easy climb? No, I don't. It's a very steep climb in this country. It's going to mean electing a president who actually respects the constitutional authority. Probably Congress won't win it in a straight up fight if the president is not committed to the Constitution in that way. But I do think that the Congress it can be a amplifier of public opinion that does have an impact on the president. I've seen it have an impact in this case in Iran. I've seen it have an impact in Yemen. I've seen it have an impact on Obama and Syria. And that's why we need more people in Congress willing to speak up.
The last question, which is one we pose to all of our guests, Congressman, what is a question that you think more people, more Americans should be asking?
What am I going to do, and what are my kids going to do in an AI future? How am I going to build economic security? How's my community going to build wealth? What does the 21st century economy mean for me and my family?
Congressman Khanna, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Just Asking Questions. If you want to support the show and help it grow, please like and share this episode. Leave a comment letting us know what you think, and if you have questions you'd like us to answer or any suggestions, you can email us at justaskingquestions@reason.com. See you next time.